So welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining us on this last session of Heart and Soul of Leadership. It has been a long journey since December, and thank you so much, because it has been as well a beautiful one where we had many people attending and a very good feedback. So we started in December with responding to the call, taking up the role, realizing the challenges and the invitations that becoming a superior general or part of the leadership team entails. And as well, we listened to formation, theological formation, spiritual formation, and also some testimonies from other sisters in the same position and with the same experience. Then in January, again, by leadership, the Sending Leadership team, we looked at teamwork, how to go together, how to work together, how to build a team of people that probably didn't know each other so well, and now they are sharing the same mission, how to go through conflict, to transform conflict into growth, how to be aware of oneself and also to be aware of others. Then in March, as well, a little bit different, we had formation on canon law. We had Sister Maren Rose and Sister Kelly Connors with us, leading us through these paths of canon law, which also enable us to walk a spiritual path. It's not only rules, but it's a learning, a knowledge that enables us to discern, and to discern also with God what's the best for our sisters, often when the situations are not easy. And today, the title that brings us together is Being Your Best Self. And we have with us Sister Lynn Levo. And I don't think we need many words to present her. She's been with us many times, and she will be talking on living in the present with purpose, emotional awareness, reactivity, and responding in relationship, the power of compassionate leadership, creating a culture of well-being. She's a psychologist. She helps, and she has helped so much religious life, both female and male. She's been awarded many prizes in the US as well. She works abroad. She's part as well of the Formatus program here at UISG. And there is so much more, but I think I will hand over to her, because her wisdom, her experience, and her authority will lead us in these days. So, Sister Lynn, thank you so much for being with us, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Welcome again, everyone. For me, it's a pleasure to be with you, the women leaders in the world and in the church and in your particular congregation. And it's a challenging time, but also an opportune time. It's a time for possibility, not just issues or questions. I hope that the next 3 days will offer you some insights. The theme that I'm working with is being your best self, which is exactly what all of us want to be, our best self. So I'm hopefully going to offer some insights around well-being and being a leader with compassion, also how the importance of purpose, both communal and individual. And then finally, we'll be talking in the day, as the days evolve, around the whole question of what to do with our emotional life, because it's such a critical part of leadership. And then how we can learn to be better responders and not reactors, because it's better to be able to respond than to react. So I'd like to start today with the whole question of creating a culture of well-being, or being well, which is really first for you and then for your sisters. And I'd like you to really kind of just think about the notion of well-being or being well. And I'd like to think about it in bigger ways. As soon as we hear well-being, people think, oh yeah, physically, I should eat and rest, which is absolutely true. However, I'd like us to think about being well and well-being in broader terms. You know, we've heard about many times we've heard we want to put new wine in new skins. So we don't want to be thinking the way we used to think about well-being in order to live today, because it's a new time and a new place, and we have new insights and new possibilities. So an important task of leadership is you're caring for your members and helping them to care for one another. And I think that's one of the shifts. Caring for new members. Yes, that's your job, whatever it is, you know, whatever part of the leadership team you're on. But we really are called to care for one another. And so we're really talking about a more horizontal model, not just a top-down model. And it's really important because when members are well, they feel good about themselves, they feel good about each other, they function better, whether it's in their retirement years or in their active ministry years, and they live a more meaningful life and are happier. So I'd like to talk about well-being in several categories, some of which are pretty simple and you already know. The first one is about the call to growth. Sisters, every day is an opportunity to learn and to become a better person. Learning didn't stop when you ended the novitiate or temporary vows when there's still a formation program. But every day is an opportunity to learn, to feel free, to create, to think about things differently. One of the keys for you as a leader is, are you open to new ideas and suggestions? And in particular, how you respond to a new idea or a suggestion. You know, somebody might say, what if we did this? Or could we try this? And we really want to be able to open to seriously consider an invitation like that. Now, one of the challenges is when somebody does that in the middle of a meeting, that you have an agenda and a plan. So we have to be flexible enough to hear it, maybe come back to it. So do you provide a place that's safe enough for your sisters, whether it's on the leadership team itself or with at a meeting or on a one-to-one, for them to say, ask, suggest? When we talk about health, we really are talking about health on several levels, but we really are talking certainly about physical health. And one of the things we're learning, sisters, here is the importance of nutrition, what we're putting in our systems. And, you know, we can get sloppy here, we can get not as paying attention, and we ingest things that are not helpful to us. And I'm particularly talking about, sisters, our retirement communities, where our older sisters are, where it's easier to grab a sweet than a piece of fruit. You know, so nutrition has implications for physical health, but sisters, it has great implications for mental health and for things like dementia. So just that the new understandings about nutrition become critical. The other thing I would highlight here is movement. And I want to talk about movement for us, for those of us in leadership positions, because we sit too much. we are sedentary, we're behind our desk, we're sitting a lot. And so one of the questions to yourself is, how do you get a little bit more movement in your daily life? Maybe you can have a phone conversation while you're walking in your office. Getting up and moving becomes a critical help to your well-being and health. And so we have to talk about your well-being and health as critical in order for you to be a model and to invite your sisters to well-being and health, physical health and mental health. The third area is a sense of control. Sisters, some of us are wanting more control than others. So you have to ask yourself, how much control do I look for in my life? How much control do I think I need? This is a time of uncertainty and evolving understandings. And so it's really important that you understand yourself first, that being in control of all the elements, if that's who you learn to be, that might be an added stressor for you. So how do you do what you need to do, make choices that you need to make, and also live with a bit more unknowing or flexibility? We've learned that being in control is absolutely essential, when in the reality of today is living with uncertainty is more likely what you're being asked to do. And here's my favorite word, and that is to say, you do have choices. And it's really important that you live with intention. What's my intention today as our leadership team meets, as I meet with our sisters? So to realize what choices you do have, to live with a sense of purpose and intention, and to really help your sisters, we're going to talk about purpose a lot tomorrow, to have a sense of they have a purpose, whatever age and stage of life they're in. So if you think being in control is absolutely essential at a time when uncertainty is part of the daily life, you might want to be able to say, have I made certainty, control, bigger than it needs to be at this time? We talk about resilience. You'll hear this word used a lot, especially when situations of difficult situations, traumatic situations. But what we know about being resilient, which is the capacity to cope with what is happening, what we know about resilience is it really comes out of a daily practice of encouraging and supporting care for yourself, knowing what to do on a daily basis so that when something is more stressful or more challenging, you have what you do to keep yourself in the best way possible. It really is about self-care in its biggest terms. Self-care. What do I do to relax? What do I do to soothe? What do I do to just take a break? What do I do to slow down? Practicing those things are very important on a daily basis, and they will be very helpful to you when situations are more stressful or more demanding. And what I'd like to say to you, and this is true in many areas, there is no one right way. There's what works for you. There is no one right way. What works for you? What helps you to be your best self so that you can respond to whatever is happening? When we talk about connection, we're really talking about promoting strong and healthy relationships. And sisters, the first strong and healthy relationships need to be your relational life, your relationship with your friends, with family, and then also with your sisters. Sisters, you can't make leadership your life. You need a life outside of leadership. You need to be able to relax with a friend, to have a cup of coffee with someone you're not in charge, you're not the leader, you know. And so it's really important that if you do that in your personal life, then you can encourage relationships and connection in the life of your sisters. You know, Pope Francis talked about the call for men and women religious to be experts in communion. And the whole question of communion, what it means is to be in relationship with others and be yourself. And so it's without losing yourself that you're in relationship with others, that oneness. And that's such an important thing for everyone, and especially in leadership. And so one of the invitations, I think one of the shifts that I would encourage is helping to create a culture of support and caring among your sisters. It's not just for you to be the one who is supportive and caring. And so now we're talking about really a different model here. We're really talking about a culture of collaborative support, of helping one another. And sisters, this is particularly true, especially when it's a time of loss and grief and grieving. What we're learning is grief is not an individual affair. Grief is a communal affair, and we help each other with the losses and the grieving, whether it's of a person or of a particular ministry or of a particular building or a foundation that we're letting go. The question of belonging is really important, especially for those of you who have younger members, but it's true for all of us, okay? And when we talk about belonging, we're really talking about a sense, I fit here. I am important here. I'm really someone who is, I'll use the term necessary, you know. And so when a person feels that they belong, then they also feel important. They feel that they can be themselves. And that's one of the critical yearnings of some of our younger members, that they can be themselves and be respected and accepted. And so one of the challenges or invitations really of fostering belonging is that we can invite, respect differences and we don't all have to be the same. And so perspective, what's really important here is that we invite new members and all members to be themselves and to have a sense that they can be themselves and feel a real connection to one another and to the congregation's purpose. Why are you here? And you're going to hear me talk tomorrow about connecting their individual why am I here, to the communal why, and have a sense of belonging. What we're learning is belonging, a part of belonging is feeling a part of something bigger. So that's a critical newer insight. A sense of belonging is related to feeling a part of something bigger. And the something bigger is our congregational why. Why are we here as a group? And they feel a part of that. The last thing I want to talk about today, and we're going to do a lot of it tomorrow, is just to talk a little bit about purpose. Sisters, everybody needs a reason to get up in the morning. And when we talk about purpose, it's that why. Why am I here? What am I going to be about today? Everyone needs to feel that their life has value and meaning and see how their day-to-day life is connected to what's important personally and what's important congregationally. And so how do you help, first of all, pay attention to your own why? Tomorrow we're going to talk about, it's not because they elected you or because somebody thinks it's important that you're there. It's your personal understanding of why you're here. It's no mistake, sisters, that you're in the position you're in. So paying attention to your why becomes critical. And I think helping every one of your sisters have a sense of purpose, whether they're in active ministry or in formation, or whether they are moving into volunteering ministry, or perhaps in their later stages of life, being prayerful supporters of the congregation and its mission. And so the whole idea of purpose takes on new meaning today than it ever has in the past. And we're going to talk about that in a lot of ways tomorrow. So focusing on purpose is one of the ways that you can be present with your members. And also the other thing that matters here is that you accompany them with kindness and compassion, especially at a time of uncertainty and chaos. So I'm going to pause just for a moment and ask you, what was good for you to hear? Oftentimes there's one thing that stands out, and that's why we're together. I said several things about well-being, and there's probably one invitation for you, one opportunity for you, perhaps one challenge for you. Sometimes we're meant to hear a challenge to our own personal growth and development. So let me be quiet for a moment, give you a chance to kind of think about where we've been just briefly about the whole question of being well-being. And notice it's about being more than doing. Because your days are busy, and I'm sure you're carving out this time and then you go back to something, or maybe to sleep. For those of you who are at the end of your day, you're going to kind of put this aside and go to bed. So it's helpful sometimes to put a little mark there for what was important for you to hear. So you might want to just put a little star, or you could put a question mark, or something that says, come back here. Don't miss this. So the second conversation today I'd like to invite you to is, how do you live and be your best self in a time of such uncertainty and chaos. And in particular, I want to focus on compassion as a core element, as absolutely critical to this time. You know, sisters, the world is in a precarious place. Challenging. And I think for you to be able to say, how can I be my best self? Especially in certain areas, to help yourself, your leadership group, your sisters. And that overflows to the people of God because your sisters impact so many people. So the first thing I'd like to encourage, and you know this, these are reminders, is clear and trustworthy communication. We're talking about living in a time of chaos and uncertainty. It's probably one of the biggest important tasks or elements of leadership today, that your communication be clear, honest, and this is, the challenge, especially when we're anxious ourselves, to share your message with compassion and empathy. Now, empathy, we have a new understanding of empathy. And what I'm sharing here is how is what I'm sharing, how will it be heard by another? That's the question you're asking. How will it be heard by another member of the team, by your sisters, by the people who work in healthcare with you, for you? And so we really are mindful of not only being clear and honest and transparent, but being able to say, how will this be received? How will this be received? And therefore, that could impact how you say something and the words and expressions you use. So here are some helps or some suggestions. I think it's important that you understand the questions your sisters have. And don't receive the questions as challenges, but to receive them as opportunities to hear where they're coming from. Now, I have to tell you, I was in leadership myself. Sometimes the way sisters ask questions is not, they feel more like challenges or pointing their finger. So you kind of have to let go of how they ask the question, their tone of voice in particular, and that's critical. Tone of voice delivers a huge message, and it could be of anger, frustration, disappointment, blaming. So I understand how they ask can be really challenging, but being open to their questions and trusting that underneath they really do want to know something, and you can provide some information when you can. Some questions you cannot answer, and that's what you say. I'm not able to answer that now, but you acknowledge that the question was there and how important questions are. I think listening to each sister's story. When I work with people who are accompaniers, the novice directors, the candidate directors, the temporary professed sisters, I often ask this question: do you know who they are? And the reason why I ask that is because I want them to be more aware that you probably don't know all of who they are. And so I say to you, when a sister is in front of you, or when one of your team members is talking with you or at the meeting? Do you know who she is? We know parts of who she is. We don't always know the whole story. So how do you be open to hearing her story, especially if she's causing some difficulty, especially if she's problematic in a local community? We really want to be able to understand her story. And in order to do that, you need to be worthy to hear her story. And the way you're worthy is to enter into a conversation with the really belief, I don't know all there is here. You let go of assumptions. You let go of, I know everything that's going on. And you really come with an intellectual humility. Let me try to understand. I think, sisters, some of what your job is, depending on your community or what's going on, sometimes we talk about delivering bad news. A death of a sister, a property decision, financial concerns, having to adjust how you care for your sisters, your elderly sisters. These are not easy communications. And so, how do you prepare yourself to share difficult news? And how do you, again, remember to, how will they hear me? How will they hear me? How best can they hear me? I think withholding information is not a good idea. I'm not saying give information before it's time. What I am saying is, if you withhold information and your sisters on the team or, believe that you have information, it will lead to not trusting you. And so really what we're talking about here is sharing information as best you can, as early as you can, but not doing it prematurely so that you share things that shouldn't be shared. When people have a sense, your sisters have a sense, and you're not sharing, it increases the uncertainty and anxiety. And sisters, if they don't trust you, if they learn to not trust you, it's pretty hard to regain trust. So if you're asked a question, for example, and it's really too soon to answer, you honor the question. Thank you for asking. I understand that. And I know you'd like to know. We are unable to share that at this point. Please know we will as soon as we are able to have more information and can share it with you in a helpful way. I think to minimize uncertainty is also not a good idea. There is a lot of uncertainty here. There's uncertainty about some of the congregational decisions. We're not sure today, we're not sure how we're going to deal with that piece of property, or we're not sure how to have more funds available in one of the areas of our congregation. We're working on transferring some resources or having resources shared. When you when you minimize uncertainty, it really is not honest, and it can increase anxiety and decrease trust. So that anxiety is an appropriate response to some of what we are living with. The world around us, the natural world that is being destroyed, nature having all kinds of issues with storms and all that. And also our own communal decisions or ministry decisions. And so learning how to reassure at the same time being honest. Learning how to reassure. you can acknowledge this is hard, and you can own it yourself. This is hard for me or for us as the leadership team. We're trying to figure out how to go forward. So this is difficult. This is hard. I think we need to speak to the emotional reality and not just from up here, from an intellectual place. And so that's why we talk about this is difficult. There's a lot of uncertainty here. This might be scary for you as it is for us. And so, sisters, we need to not just move to this part of our brain and to be able to speak to a more challenging part of our brain, which is the emotional part of us. It is part of our brain, but it is one of the more challenging parts. You don't want to reduce giving them facts. So data or facts are important. At the same time, you don't give them too much information or in a way that they can't understand. So this is a balancing act here of responding, talking about the feeling part of this, anxiety, scary, sad, difficult. The feeling words need to be part of the message. And at the same time, when you can provide what we call, factual or data, that can be helpful too. So you don't ignore one or the other. And the other thing I would say is you share in parts. You share in pieces. You can't give them this huge piece of information and help them and expect them to digest. And then, sisters, if you're involved in an external world like the media knows you're going to talk about this piece of property, then you have to be prepared to deal with the media selling a piece of property or changing the nature of a piece of property. The media, when they understand there's something happening, you need to be prepared to deal with them as well. Communication, clear, trustworthy. A second area for leadership is to be ready. Your job is to be ready. And it's to know yourself and your sisters and to be able to deal with whatever is happening, whatever is unfolding. It's so important that you understand your own emotional response before you trying to assist your sisters. So if something is very sad for you or very anxiety producing for you, you really need to know your own emotional state because you're going to transfer it to them by tone of voice, by what you say or what you don't say. And so it's so important that you understand if you're coming from a place of anxiety or fear, you could get stuck in that and not be able to help your sisters. So who do you talk to about your own emotional response to situations? Here's where the leadership team can be most helpful. That you just take time to deal with your emotional experience and express in a healthy way, because it's going to kind of leak out. It'll come out in your communication. It will come out in your tone of voice. It will come out in your ability to calm and walk with your sisters. So how do you help each other, especially those of you who work in teams, whether you call it a team or not? You may have a province and a council or a general aid and counselors. It doesn't matter what you call the grouping of leaders around you. How do you help each other? I think, sisters, when we make a mistake, we have to say so. Mistakes happen. Mistakes happen, and they don't have to be the end of the world. There could have been a communication that wasn't perfect. We have to be able to admit mistakes, learn from the mistakes, help each other, and not let mistakes take over, or we certainly don't want to hide them at all. And then that leads us to this thing about being a learner every day, being a learner every single day. With so much uncertainty, we don't know what's coming next. At the end of this short conversation we're having, what's next in your personal life? You just don't know. And so it's an opportunity for you to learn and for the community to learn. It's not just for you. To see opportunity, not just problems. Now, some of the difficulties we face are hard, and they come with difficult feelings of sadness and anxiety and disappointment. Those feelings are not easy. And we're going to talk about those on day 3. What happens emotionally when you're in leadership? So chaos and uncertainty can push you in ways that you never dreamed of. And one of my favorite words, they can open up new opportunities, new learnings for all of you. Support, personal support. How do you get the personal support that you need? And how do you offer support? And sisters, I think we do too much talking when we offer support. The best way you can offer support to one another and to your sisters is to ask and to listen. If you find yourself doing all the talking, that's not very supportive. It may be coming out of your anxiety. I talk more when I'm anxious. But if you could slow down, and sisters, if you don't hear anything else today, slow down. Make space. Make time. And pay attention to what they say verbally, the words, but non-verbally. They're showing you by their face, their tone of voice, their body. They're showing you a lot more of what's happening than with their words. So I'd like to talk about compassion, leading with compassion and not for compliance. How do you motivate your sisters to adapt, to develop, to persevere, to hang in there, and be what is needed to live fully, freely, and above all with love for one another and for the people of God? How do you help? What motivates them to adapt? Sisters, change is part of the deal. It's not going to stop happening. To develop, to learn, to persevere. How do you help? I think we've learned a little bit about leading with compliance, getting the person to do what we think they should do, how they should behave. When you're, in a sense, pressuring, forcing, it doesn't work in distress, when they are distressed and when things are all up in the air. It doesn't work with uncertainty. And it can lead, if they feeling pressured and certainly not heard and understood, how might they respond? They become defensive. They close down emotionally because you're not hearing the emotion. They close down cognitively. They stop thinking about possibility and choices. They physically can withdraw, and they react, which we're going to talk about on day 3, because you don't want to be reacting and they don't want to be reacting either. But that's what this compliance forces. When we say things like you should, and we can do that with our team members, you should stop asking that, or you should relax. So we use our intellectual self when there's an emotional thing that needs to be addressed. So what does leading with compassion mean? If we're not complying, trying to get them to behave, to do what they should do, and at least by your standards, you really want to help every member of your leadership team and your sisters to discover what they think, what they feel, what they hope for, what they desire, and how they can be supportive of others. And that's where we're talking about that collaborative support. That, sisters, we've learned to live more individually than collaboratively. And so how do you live with compassion? And we're going to talk about it more clearly, but a few thoughts here. You have to pay attention. What's happening with this sister? What's happening with this group? What's happening with this part of the congregation? What's happening in the country in which in this country where our sisters are trying to live and minister? What do they need? What do they need support-wise? What do they need in other ways, financially, physically? How do you see that building relationships is critical? And sisters, here we have to be a little careful. I think sometimes we get caught up in the stress of this time, the challenge of this time, that we can choose to be right rather than be in relationship. You may have a way of seeing an insight that is clearer than the sisters you're dealing with. But being right is not better than being in relationship. So relationship building becomes a priority. We talk about vulnerable truth-telling, which is the basis of trust. Sisters, this is fundamental to your leadership group. When we look at leadership groups that fail, that don't work, the number one thing we have learned is the women, the men in the group do not tell the truth in a vulnerable way. And that often means talking about what it feels like. I'm anxious about this because. I'm really sad about this because. I'm frustrated with what's happening because. It's the basis of trust is that we be vulnerable in the truth that we tell, especially to one another in a leadership group. I'm having a hard time with our conversation right now. I don't know how to say more clearly what's happening with me. I don't feel heard. Can you help me? I think suspending judgment is absolutely critical. We're good at judging, and it's not helpful. If we're talking about compassion, we really have to pay attention to how much we come to the situation with judgment. Here she goes again. Same story we're hearing. We can do that in a leadership team. We stop listening because the internal thing says, same old, same old. So how do you realize that you're judging and how little you may be affirming? And so we have to balance judgment. You can disagree. You can say, I don't agree. I'm having a hard time. It doesn't mean you don't speak the truth. But if we, before something even happens, we don't allow it to happen because we say, we're in a judging mode, doesn't help. And it also raises two other important issues. How affirming are you? Do you notice the good? Do you say, I really appreciated that, or that was, what a good idea, or I would have never thought about that in a million years? And are you grateful? We have to be grateful for the small things, the little things that happen every day. And when we practice gratitude, it's a way, it's an invitation to joy, a deeper feeling of more than happiness, of joy. It comes with gratitude. It doesn't come without gratitude. Creating opportunities for listening as often as you can. When you visit your sisters, do you always have to have an agenda? Do you just, sometimes they need a little help. They're wondering, why are you here? if you're visiting. So you can say, I'm just here, and you might give them a question. But if you're doing all the talking. And then finally, being a role model yourself. You can't ask of others what you don't ask of yourself. So I'd pause for a minute and say, what are you hearing? What are you hearing about the whole question of readiness? Readiness to be a leader this day with this group of sisters, or in your leadership group today. What are you doing to be ready? So a little bit more on compassion. And isn't it interesting that on May 29th, Pope Leo, our new Holy Father, said this, May 29th. Before being a religious matter, compassion is a question of humanity. Before being believers, we are called to be human. Let us pray then that we can grow in humanity so that all relationships may be truer and richer in compassion. Sisters, our first vocation is to be human. Our first vocation is to be human. And the life we are called to, for us, religious life, is a means, is a way to become more human. And to be human is a spiritual journey. It's not just a psychological journey. I get to work with a lot of newer members, inter-community novitiates. And what we're trying to do with them, which didn't always happen for us, who've been around a couple of years, is a foundational understanding that their first vocation is to be human. And what does being human look like? You know, for me, is to say to them, the very first thing about being human is to love and be loved. That's the start of it, which is the heart of the gospel, the heart of Jesus's message. We're here to love and be loved. So how do we help ourselves and our sisters to be more loving of themselves first, of yourself, and then of one another? And then, of course, out to the people of God. It just kind of ripples. So it's pretty hard to be loving and et cetera without having some ability to be compassionate with ourselves and others. So when I was thinking about compassion, I think some of you know that I have a sort of practical part of me. So I was trying to think of how to talk about compassion in a way that gives you some hints, some steps, some ways. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So there's a mnemonic, which is the word reach, R-E-A-C-H. And we're going to have two H's. So we're going to spell it a little differently. You could put R-E-A-C-H-H when we look at what does it take to lead with compassion. The first word, the resonance word, and I'm using the work of some researchers at one of the universities here. They use the word resonance. You easily could not use resonance and put in the word relational, because that is fundamentally who we are called to be, relational women. Relationships at the heart of our communal life. Relationships at the heart of the gospel. Relationships at the heart of ministry. So we don't need to use their word. We can use a more typical word for us as women religious, relational. Depending on what part of the world you're in, sisters, there can sometimes be a little lucha, a little struggle between individual and relational. Sometimes we think one is better than the other, or we put them in opposition to one another when they don't have to be. What we're learning, another way to talk about this, relational, is we have an individual identity and a relational identity. Now, look at what I'm doing right there. We have an individual identity and a relational identity. We're not saying a relational identity and not an individual identity. That's one of the big changes. We understand that we can have an individual identity and a relational identity, and we need both. One of the American psychologists uses 3 letters, M-W-E. MWE. M-W-E. And what he's just trying to kind of wake us up to is me and you become we. Me, we. That's who we really are. That we are relational beings from the very beginning. And we can get lost by being an individual, or we can get lost by being relational to the detriment of individuals being themselves. The notion of communion is to be one with, without losing myself. So we are called to communion, to be one with, but without losing each person's self. And so when we talk about compassion here, what we're talking about is supportive, trusting, positive relationships. You with each member of your team, you with your sisters, you with the women and men who work in your congregation or minister with you. Supportive, trusting relationships. Reaching out, connecting with others. You know, you as leaders have a lot on your plate. You can get caught in the temporal things, finances, housing, healthcare, and all are very important. And you're also called to be a relational woman, to connect with your sisters, connect with one another, to connect not just what they think, but how they feel. Because the feelings are underneath what drives some of the behavior, of which some of the behavior is not helpful or positive, as we might say. And so I want to say to you, don't assume you know what is happening with another person. Notice and ask. Don't assume you know. And we're going to talk about that again in another minute here. I gave you some facts, just a little bit of facts to wake us up. It takes 40 seconds. Listen to that. 40 seconds of a caring interaction to change a person in a way that affects their whole health journey. Health here meaning physical, mental health. 40 seconds of caring, compassion can change how a person continues in their journey. 40 seconds. We're also learning, and I use this expression, the impact of keepers of the house. Now, I don't know what your particular situations are, but in several of our houses, we have persons who help with cooking, or they help with cleaning, or they help with health care, depending on where you're at, you know. But whoever the keepers of the house are, they can have a tremendous impact on well-being. They often are the people we don't see. They're cleaning the corridor, or emptying the wastebasket, or preparing a meal. And how they interact, how they resonate, how they relate to our sisters is sometimes better than what we do. So who would you put as the keepers of the house? And how do we realize their gift to us? How are we grateful for that? How do we notice? And how do just a kind word, oh, sister, I have your favorite dessert today, or I have your favorite fruit today, or how can I help you today? Relating. As leaders, we can get caught up in doing. This is about being with, noticing. The second element here is about empathy. I know as leader, we want to be understood. You know, you're trying to deliver a message. You have important information. You want them to understand a particular situation. It could happen in the leadership group. You have some information that you want them to understand. It's not a bad thing. We do want to be understood, you know. And what we're trying to do here is the compassion, the shift to compassion is wanting to understand as well as to be understood. Sometimes we get caught in, I want them to understand me, and we don't realize it's both. How does she walk in her shoes? We're talking about the sister next to you in your meeting room. How does she walk in her shoes? What is she asking? What is she saying? What is she trying to teach me, to teach us? So I'd like to make a distinction, which may sound a bit funny, but I'd like to make the distinction between perspective taking and perspective getting. I hope this translates well. Sometimes, English isn't always the easiest, but. So what do I mean by perspective taking? Let's say you're meeting with one of your sisters and you're thinking about, oh yeah, I know she's going to come and ask this, and I know this is going to be difficult. And, you kind of imagine or think that you know what it's like for her. And you say, well, isn't that a good thing? Perspective taking? It often can be with your own bias, with less than full information. So a better choice would be perspective getting. Don't assume you know. Ask. Get the information that you need to help you to understand. Leave behind assumptions, old learnings. You never know. Today's a new day. And maybe you haven't heard what she has to say today. Empathy, really, the capacity to understand how she walks in her shoes, really comes from a profound humility. I don't know it all. Or as a team, we do not know it all. Are we willing to be informed, to ask? And I have to say, when we ask, it can lead to feeling vulnerable. So maybe that's why we don't do it as much, because we don't know what she's going to say or what the other person is dealing with. And so you might have to deal with new information or something different than you expected. So it can be a little vulnerable, but that's what relationships are about, that give and take, the lack of surety. We prefer to act. Sometimes we prefer to tell what to do. Do this, don't do this. It usually doesn't help with adult people. So the E for this reach is empathy. We can get better here. The A is always important, is awareness. And it always starts with you being in touch with where you're coming from, your thinking, your feeling, and how other people are, what other people are asking of you, and how to be in relationship with them as they are, not always as you are. When we're going to talk on Friday, not Friday, yeah, it is Friday of this week, we're going to talk about reacting. And sisters, we've all done it. You want to be your best self and you find yourself reacting. You raise your voice, you stop listening, however the reaction comes about. Reacting is coming from not just the present situation, but the past. And it's so important that we understand that when we say, she made me so angry, that your anger is not just related to what's happening in the present, but it's related to the past. And we're learning a lot, sisters, about trauma and past experiences and how they influence the present. So when we talk about awareness, we're really talking here about living as fully as possible in the present moment, not coming out of a past awareness. It's so important that you understand how to be your best self by being aware of not just what you think, but how you feel. I often say, and we'll talk a little bit about Friday on this, about reactions. We're pointing our finger, say, you and me, whatever we're trying to point out to the other person. But I always remember there's three fingers coming right back at me. And so sometimes what we need to do is a U-turn. When we find ourselves reacting, not being our best self, we need to bring ourselves back to ourself, which can be hard to do in the moment if you're all fired up, but it happens. So that's why the last thing we'll talk about is responding and learning to respond better than to react. The other thing you need to remember is feelings are contagious. Feelings are contagious. If you're filled with anxiety and you don't do anything to kind of work with your own anxiousness, you'll give it to the other team members, or they'll give it to you. It's also true we can give those feelings to our sisters. There's no doubt about it. There's uncertainty in the time we are living. You can't wipe it all out. We're not saying that. But how you come with, if it's just absolutely no processing of the anxiety, no ability to calm and reset, you just give it to them. And then we wonder why everybody is equally as upset as you. So in part of this leading with compassion, we come to the word compassion itself, is to feel with. And that's another definition you could use, to feel with. That comes really from the heart of the word, compassion, to feel with. A deeper meaning sometimes is, and it's helpful depending on the situation, is to suffer with. Not just to feel with, but to suffer with. Because some of the situations that you're facing with your sisters, with each other, are really quite painful and are places where you suffer with. You're not that detached. You know that experience. And so, what is it that's happening with her? What does she need? How can you respond in meaningful ways? I'm not saying fix it. Some things can't be fixed. And so the emphasis here is on caring, warmth, tenderness. Many situations are not fixable. And so we're really talking here, accompany, walk with. which is what I talk to vocation directors, novice directors. I say we've got to change our understanding from directing anybody to accompanying. Discernment of a vocation doesn't happen when we tell people what to do every moment of the day they're with us in a particular setting. It comes from accompanying, walking with, feeling with, suffering with, helping them find their way. Compassion. I think one of the challenges, and we'll talk again about Friday on this, when somebody's being reactive with you, they're unhappy with you. They're saying you don't understand and you don't care about me, however they're interacting with you because you've asked to see them, something isn't good. You're trying to figure out why they're having so much difficulty in the local community or whatever. The first thing you want to do before you address their behavior is to connect. To connect, to be relational, and to try to connect at the emotional level rather than up here, the intellectual level. The emotional level is what needs to be heard. And so we use a little way of understanding how do you proceed? What do you do? There's 3 little words that might help you, and we're going to talk about again on Friday. Relate, regulate, reason. Let me tell you what those 3 words mean. The first one says relate. You want to connect with your sister, your teammate, a person who's problematic. You want to connect with them, not about what's happening or not happening. You want to connect with them as a person to another person. We're talking about compassion is a question of humanity first. So it's how we begin the conversation. We're not talking about her inappropriate behavior or the difficulty. We're talking about her and you. Relate. Regulate. Meet her at that emotional level so she feels understood. And you, in your calmness, are going to help her to calm so that eventually you get to the R word, reason. You want to get to reason. That's inappropriate behavior. That was a poor choice. You want to get there from up here before you do what's down underneath, which is the emotional piece. Relate. Regulate, which means you have to be in that as calm a state as you can. And as she mirrors you, you get to then reason with her. You want to reason with her when there's no capacity to hear you. Relate, regulate, reason. So compassion is about relating and regulating, feeling with. And then you can get to Let's talk about what happened in your local community. Let's talk about what happened at the meeting. Let's talk about. Slow down, make time, be with. In the long run, it will save you lots of time and energy in the long run. Slow down, make time, be with. In the handout, I say you have a front row seat to their emotions. Some of their emotions will be expressed verbally. I'm frustrated, I'm disappointed, I hate you, whatever they're saying. And some of them are nonverbal. In particular, and that's true for you, some of your emotions are expressed verbally. I'm disappointed in you, I'm sad, I'm frustrated. And some of them are expressed non-verbally. Sisters, one of the things you need to pay attention to is your tone of voice. Tone of voice. It expresses about 30% of your message. So if you're trying to be kind and caring and you're shouting, 30% of the message is from the tone of voice. It doesn't matter what your words are. So paying attention to nonverbal communication, how you see, gestures, tone of voice, speed at which we speak. When we speak too fast, doesn't help. And so you're best able to be a compassionate responding when you've listened, and you've listened to the words and the emotions underneath. When you ignore their emotions, they don't feel heard. What's challenging for you is they don't often use emotional words, or they're not always connected to their own emotions. So you kind of have to intuit, use your intuition to say, she's going on and on and on. What do I think she feels? And can you touch into, even it might be a guess, I think she's really afraid. And you might say, are you afraid right now? And then you begin to help her identify, because she's not good at emotions, just like we aren't. So this whole understanding of emotions becomes critical. And we're going to talk about it tomorrow and on Friday. We've learned to ignore them. We don't value them. And yet they're the heart of connecting. If we get better at noticing, honoring, respecting. So when we reach out with compassion, it encourages the other person to be more open, to learn, to adapt, to grow. So there's a lot of benefit from reaching out with compassion, with empathy. Very beneficial at a time of change and uncertainty, which is the time we live in. And that's not going to change tomorrow. One last word here is it always starts with you. You're in a challenging place, sisters, as leaders. How do you be compassionate with yourself? And who helps you to walk with the uncertainty and the challenges? The H part of reach that we're dealing with here, reach, is hope. Now, we have learned a lot about hope in the last 30 years. Some of it is theological, for those of you who know the work of Moltmann, the German theologian, who just died, I think, last year. Moltmann says several things that are helpful from a theological perspective, and then I'll add from a psychological perspective, because it's a big issue in psychology as well. Notice Moltmann says it's based on reality. And so when you speak the truth to your sisters in a way that they can hear, it's the beginning of how to help them be hopeful in the midst of all the uncertainty and chaos. Pretending never helps. Now, you share the reality in pieces in a helpful way, for sure. Moltmann says that what hope really is a desire for something better. So when you say, I hope I win the lottery, what you're really saying is, I hope that the money I get from the lottery will help me have a better life. So it's always about, hope is about having a better life, something better, which is absolutely part of what it means to be a human person. It's fundamental. A desire for more life. Think of it that way. Hope is a desire for more life. I'm sure that you want, and the reason why you're listening today, we talked today, is why it's about becoming your best self. You want more life for you and for every member of your congregation. Right. Hopeful. What we've learned from psychology is there's some key points. For you to be hopeful, how can your sisters be hopeful? The first one is, it only happens with real connection with others. Hope is related to connection with others. It does not happen in isolation. Look what happened with the COVID pandemic. Isolation was deadly. And so how do you stay connected? How do you help your sisters stay connected? How do you not let them fall into isolation? And by the way, isolation leads to despair and depression. It has some negative consequences. So first thing is hope, connection. You make that's the first thing. The second thing is, hope is related to choices. To choices. As soon as you say, I have no choice, there's nothing I can do here, it can't be a hopeful time in your life. And so we have to help our sisters at whatever age and stage of life they're in to realize every day they have choices. Every day they have choices. They may be small. What are they going to have for breakfast? Or they may be bigger. How am I going to interact with the world around me? How am I going to stand up for the values that we stand for? Choices. Hope can't happen without choices. We have to help our sisters realize there are many times they have choices. The third one, these are what helps us psychologically to be hopeful. The third one is knowing how to care for yourself. Knowing how to care for yourself. And in particular here, we're talking about what helps me deal with stress in my life, what helps me deal with anxiety, what helps me to calm down, What helps me, the word I want to use is soothe, calming. What helps me to relax? In the midst of all the craziness that's happening in the world, the war, the poverty, the hunger, the abuse, the environmental degradation, how do we calm, care, reduce stress and anxiety? And that means literally making some choices about that and including God in the picture. We are women of spirit and light, you know? But we have to do our part. We can't pray away anxiety or challenges. And believe it or not, the fourth element in hope, and this is coming from the psychological world, that people who have a belief in a benevolent, caring, faithful God, individuals who rely on a benevolent, caring, faithful God are more hopeful. So notice it's another relational life. It starts with the relational life, this idea of being hopeful. And it also is a relational life with a benevolent, caring, faithful God. And so prayer and meditation and encouraging a spiritual life is integral. And these are the psychologists talking. We're not talking about women religious. So there's wisdom coming all around us from a theological perspective. That's Moltmann, a desire for more life. And we talk from a psychological perspective, connect, choose, care, trust. Hope. You may be a hope encourager in your community. And if you're hopeful, your sisters are more likely to be hopeful. It's not looking through rose-colored glasses. It's not optimism. Optimism is based not on reality. So we have one more H. So our reach is spelled R-E-A-C-H-H-H, okay? Humor. Humor can help lessen stress, increase satisfaction. And so we have to know when to introduce humor or how to have humor be a part of our life. I live with a younger member who brings, every once in a while, brings some joke to the dinner table. And sometimes they're kind of silly. But sometimes, you just can't help but laugh. What better way to digest your meal than to laugh a little? So when do we not fear humor? When do we incorporate humor in our life? How do we not have, we're dealing with very difficult situations, for sure. How do we, on a given day, not to realize it's not the end of the world, or that we can lighten it up a tad? So think about your own ability to take things lightly, which is another way to talk about humor. And to realize that humor usually is in relationship to others are involved, that we can do this together. Not singly, but together. So what are you hearing that was good for you to hear? What help was shared so that you can approach your leadership position with compassion? Hmm. I tried to say a little less today, so we have a little bit of pausing, a little bit of space. And we also have the ability to ask questions, to help one another. I don't think you realize how there's a lot of wisdom among you. And that would be perhaps the last thing I would share is in your regions where you are to collaborate with one another to help live and lead at a very challenging time. You know, there's a lot of wisdom among you. So, Paula, I think we could just give a few moments of quiet, and then we can see all things are welcome. Sometimes it's good for us to hear a particular comment and why it was helpful. That can be one of the responses. Questions are certainly welcomed. And so if we, does that make sense, Paula, that we'll take just a couple of moments of quiet to say, is there something you can help the group with by sharing a particular comment or understanding? Questions are all welcome. And I'm trying to figure out how best to do that. Do we do a raised hand and call on folks?
Yes, thank you, Lynn. Yes, we think, oh, I'm losing my voice. I think we can do both. So if we have a time of silence, and then after that, people can write on the chat a comment, a question. There are already many comments there. And then if people want to raise their hand as well, we can also listen to people live, which is always very helpful. So let's have just 5 minutes. So that has been a beautiful, even though long listening. So I'm sure that people need just a 5 minute break, and then we'll be back for the last half an hour. Is that all right? Okay, so I think we can resume. There are many, many comments on the chat in many languages, Lynn, so I imagine that you can read them as well. Highlighting so many nuggets, golden nuggets, wisdom nuggets that you've shared with us. Very simple but very insightful guidelines that can help in leadership. I've spotted so far 3 questions.
Okay.
So one of them is, can you say a bit more about why ignoring emotions dismisses the person? Please, thank you.
Because we have a new understanding of what it means to be human, we need to think seriously about hearing, understanding, responding to the emotional part of a person, and what they, not just what they think, but how they feel. And one of the reasons is because feelings are driving a lot of the behavior, you know, and it also is when we are able to relate to a person at the feeling level, they feel seen and heard, not dismissed. So, you know, in the past, we've learned a lot from a psychological perspective. You know, we used to look at behavior, behavior, behavior. That's all you looked at. And then we looked at what do people think? What do people think? What do people think? And now we understand there's a central part of the brain called the emotional part of the brain, which carries a lot of influence and impacts what people say and do. So we're really trying to understand more fully what does it mean to be a fully functioning human person. And it includes not just this part of the brain, the thinking part, but the emotional part of the brain. And so that's why if we can be more aware of and acknowledge and accept and respond to emotions, we are responding to more of a complete person. And if they're not regulated, if they're in a turmoil, if they're struggling and there's lots of stress and anxiety, coming at the intellectual part of them, reasoning with them doesn't work. You could say to a person, you know, who's highly anxious, oh, everything is going to be okay. And that's the kind of things we do. We kind of say, yeah, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. We'll figure this out. When in fact, we never touched the emotional part. So it really doesn't work and they don't feel heard. I hope that helps. It's because of new learning and the integration of not just what we think, but how we feel.
Thank you, Lynn. I think as well from what you're saying, it's a new perception and understanding of the human person and of the consecrated human person. I think that in the past, what you said about compliance, we were just thought that we had to do it because we were told, and now we're just realizing it's much more.
One other thing,
yeah.
One other thing might help, and that is right now we are learning a tremendous amount about trauma and the impact of traumatic experiences from the past all the way up to now. And trauma, to touch trauma or to deal with the responses of trauma it isn't from an intellectual perspective. This may help you to look at if you put your fist up here like this, okay, if this were the brain, this part, okay, if we're going to raise up these 3 fingers, that's what we call your upstairs brain. Your upstairs brain. That's where logic and reason and making decisions and looking at pros and cons, that's in your upstairs brain. Down here, right here, underneath our thumb here, this is called the downstairs brain, down here. And this is where emotions are. And this is where trauma is housed. And so when a person is really upset and we say things like, everything will be okay, you're operating up here from the upstairs brain, and the issue is here in the downstairs brain, which is where the emotions are. So learning how to do this, and you help this by you being in a more regulated way, and then you can go to reason. Then you can go to reason. A good example, if a child is afraid of a storm and they come running into their mother and they say, Mommy, I'm afraid the storm. She can say, oh, we have a strong house, nothing will happen, go play. Doesn't help. She's using her upstairs brain. But if she says, come over here, and she puts her arm around the little one and says, now tell me what's happening. What's happening? Oh, you're afraid. And you're afraid because, and she's staying calm and regulated. The child comes, then you can talk about, we have a strong house, honey. The strong house makes no sense until there's some calming, and that happens by touch, by relationship, by emotion.
Thank you, Elaine. It's so important. So on that response, there's a question that I don't know if I understand totally, but I will read it out as it is, and then you will make what you can out of it. When I try to improve my relationship with a sister who I find difficult, how do I manage intellectual humility with my feelings in order to improve the bond? I find it a very deep question. Intellectual humility with my feelings in order to improve the bond.
Well, there's several potential responses to that. One is, I think it always starts with you, with self-awareness. So I think I would start with saying to myself, what is it about her that I find difficult? So you're raising awareness. What is it about her that I find difficult? She's always needs to be right. She doesn't listen. Whatever you can name, if you can name it. But I think so, away from an interaction in your own mind and heart, you say, because your intention, and that's really important, your intention is to get to be able to interact with her in a way that is helpful for you and her. You're trying to be a relational person. That's your intention. So I think outside of the interaction, it's hard to do in the moment. It's really hard, to say, what is it about her that I find difficult? The next thing I say may not be, you may not want to hear, but oftentimes what we find difficult in another is also in us. So that's when you do a U-turn and you say, at least be willing to ask, how is that in me? And in some ways, it's easier for me not to reject it in her than to deal with my own stuff. Let me use anger as an example. I have a difficulty with her because she's angry. It seems to be the typical response. So you're saying, see, I have difficulty with her because it's anger. But if you turn it this way, you bring those 3 fingers back to you, then you ask this question, how is that in me? Now, what's interesting about anger, oftentimes it looks like it looks in her. You react, you you're aggressive, you blow up, you shout. But sometimes it's anger, but not in the way she shows it. So let me give you a hint for women in particular. We take anger and have learned it is not okay. So what do? We get depressed. We shove down the anger and kind of swallow it. So is it in you what it is that you find difficult in her? Is it in you? Is it an invitation for you to know yourself better? Is it an invitation for you to learn to be, to be your best self? That's what we're talking about. So that's one way to look at the difficulty we find in other people. The other thing, it depends if you've done that inner work and it is more that it isn't within you, then you can also say, especially if you have to continue to interact with the person like a team member, you might say, you might ask her to look at the behavior that she exhibits that creates difficulty for you. You might say, first of all, you make a relationship statement. I want to work with you. I want to be in relationship with you in the best way possible. Then you use a connecting word, and. You do not use the word but. And you say, one of the things I find difficult in our relating is it seems, notice a little bit of tentative there, it seems you always correct what I say. Can we talk about that? You might be a little, always is probably too strong a word. You tend to correct what I say often. Can we talk about that? So now you're dealing with the behavior that is impacting your relationship, and you ask her to be different. That's what you do. When you ask people to look at behavior, you're saying, I'm asking you to change. Now, you also have to be willing to hear her ask you to change. And I'm not talking tit for tat. I'm talking at another time, she may say, what would help me is if this. So if you're willing to be that honest and invite each other to growth and change to help one another, then you can get through that in a better way. Don't ignore the difficulty. Check to see if it's also with you and how you're being asked to grow and change, and then talk at a level where the relationship is central and you want to deal with behaviors that get in the way.
Lynn, thank you. Thank you so much. There's still a couple of questions and probably more will come. How to develop the attitude of hearing with compassion without judging. So you've mentioned that, to suspend judgment. Can you explain that a little more, please? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I didn't use the word healer, but I would like you to use the word healer. What if you saw that leadership is about being a healer? And what are we healing? We're healing our own wounds by the very act of leadership, and we're healing the wounds of our sisters because we all have them. So leadership as healer, leader as healer, is an interesting mindset that you might want to consider, because I think it is more helpful, and therefore it invites compassion more than invites direction. Now, the whole question of judgment. It's a part of us. We've learned, some of us, much more than others. And you have to ask yourself, how quickly do I move to judgment? And it is, it's been part of the journey. It's part of the journey of religious life. I think our legacy burden, listen to that language, our legacy burden of perfectionism breeds judgment. Trying to be right, or feeling the need to be right, breeds judgment. The sense of there's only one way to do things brings judgment. And so I think if you tend to judge, and we all do, some of us more than others, that's the fact, then you have to ask yourself, what is the judgment? What's underneath the judgment? And what triggers me to judge? And is it my need to be right? Is it about control? Is it about there's only one way? Is it about perfectionism? Let me give you a new insight that I'm playing with, that's inviting, challenging me. You know, in the gospel, in Matthew, Jesus says, be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. As God is perfect, God holds it all. The right and the wrong, the good and the bad, the yes and the no. So being perfect is the ability to hold sometimes the opposites. Perfectionism is about a right answer. Are we called to be perfect? Yes. Are we called to perfectionism? I don't think so. It's pretty deadly. So again, look at your own learning about judgment. And by the way, if you have a history of being judged, starting when you're in your youth at home, you might be well practiced in doing it yourself, and you know how hurtful it is. So again, it requires that self-examination. Where does it come in my life? How did I learn this? And the world around us is quite judging. So maybe it's just, you don't want to be, it can be contagious too. So watch it and try not to go there. But it is a part of my life. It is a part of our life. It's a part of religious life that is not our best self.
Thank you, Lynn. I think as well as these legacy burden, we are called also to change these legacies so that other generations can receive these compassionate perfection rather than this perfectionism that you're speaking of. Thank you.
Right.
So another question that goes in this same direction, how can we break down our structures? How can we change our structures, probably of consecrated life, to achieve compassionate leadership? Sometimes these things seem to be one against the other: deadlines, right answers, efficiency. So how to be more compassionate as well when our structures sometimes don't help? Thank you.
Well, I do think it's a mindset, for one thing. You know, and we're going to talk about purpose tomorrow. What do you think your purpose really is? I think to be the executive. I think we've made leadership not leader as healer, but leader as executive. Do you really need spending the time and the energy that you spend on certain things? You only have a certain amount, you know. Are you is your main job being the CEO? Or is it a more relational place, a position? I do think our life has evolved, so it's you step into a life, and there's lots of you should do that. How many people tell you how to be a leader? You should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should, oh. And so I think it's rethinking, what does it really mean to be a leader today? I also think it means being able to delegate, to share so that you don't do every little piece of what is now on, and you have to be able to have competent people trust who can do that part of it, that share that piece. You can share it among your team, but you also share it with other people. Finances, for example, maybe intimately. And so I do think what you inherited becomes me, and what are the to, and at the call of what it be a woman, a leader in a religious congregation of women at a evolving, challenging time. So I do think it's a question of what did you inherit? How do we reframe? Even thinking about yourself as leader, as healer, leader as accompanier versus leader as director. If you change your mindset, then the behaviors have to change. And also people have to be willing, we have to be willing to let you change, to offer us a new perspective. You know, this is a new time and a new place. We can't be pouring old wine into new skins, but you know, transformation takes time. We're really talking about transformation. Change is adjusting the past so it gets a little better. Transformation is envisioning something new. So we are in that process, whether you like it or not, we're there. And we just don't want to be about change, although you do make practical changes to help life be a little easier, a little bit more open, all that. And we're also doing that life-giving, transformative work about something new. Easier said than done.
Easier said than done, exactly. So Lynn, thank you so much. I think that you just said something so important, which is transformation is not changing the past, not only changing the past, but envisioning something new. Mm-hmm. Before we finish, would you like to say some words for what's going to happen tomorrow? Because you've been giving us insights. I'll speak about this tomorrow. I'll speak about this on Friday. So, because also I'm sure that we can still invite other sisters to come and listen to us, and for the sisters that have been today with us, just give us a little bit of the next scene's insight so that we can come back tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, really the whole day tomorrow, it may sound like really 2 hours, you know, but yes, 2 hours on purpose. I really want to talk about the significance of purpose in our life today, which is filled with chaos and uncertainty. How purpose, sometimes we get caught up in vision, mission, goals, and we don't connect it to why we're here. So I'm going to talk about purpose, why, and then we're going to talk about how it's important for every one of your sisters to think about individual purpose, which, by the way, has an internal and an external dimension, internal dimension, external dimension. And then I'd like to spend a little time with you thinking about why you're here, your purpose. Now, you could say, well, they elected me. That's not a purpose. They tell me what to do. The Constitution or the chapter tells me what to do. Not exactly a purpose. So we'll kind of explore the notion of purpose tomorrow, and hopefully just take a break from all the do, and do, just to begin to kind of give yourself maybe a way of internally thinking about your journey. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about the whole emotional journey that you're on, including some of the challenging emotions that leaders face, like frustration and disappointment and sadness. And then we'll talk about that whole thing about being a responder, not a reactor, and how reaction is related to your personal history and the experiences where you felt overwhelmed in the past. And so it's really the beginning of sharing what we're learning about trauma. And so let me define trauma for you for a minute, because some people think, oh, what is she talking about? It's any experience that you had in the past that you felt overwhelmed when you experienced it. So we have several. Trauma is more normal than we think. Experiences of being overwhelmed. You could experience some being overwhelmed now, which is also traumatic. So the question is, the reactivity of us is related not just to today, to the past. So we'll try to make some connections for you as we learn, and this is really true, as we learn who we learn to be, how it impacts who we are today, and the invitation of who we are called to be going forward.
Lynn, thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to these days. And I also look forward to reread and revisit what you've given to us today. Thank you for your tone of voice. Thank you for your pace. At the same time, I think there is so much richness that it's impossible to take it in one go. So I invite you all to reread your notes, to read the materials. The videos will be ready hopefully next week, because this takes time. As well, we thank our translators, Isaias, Pascal, Silvina, and Ambra, that have been your voice as well in other languages. And I think they were following your pace and your tone, actually. I think as well, they were conditioned or determined by you. If you haven't received an email from me, please do register so that you can have access to the materials. I'll put the registration form on the chat, or send me an email, formation@uisg.org. And I'd like to finish, Lynn, if you allow me, with this passage that it's the parallel of Luke to the one you said, where Luke in chapter 6, verse 36 says this: be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and there will be gifts for you. A full measure, pressed down, shaken together, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. Because the standard you will use will be the standard used for you. Then Jesus goes on saying, can one blind person guide another? Surely both will fall into a pit. So, Lynn, thank you so much for making this word of God the grace that God wants to give us alive. It's not just a question of willpower. It's a question of knowing ourselves, being compassionate, allowing God to help us, ourselves, for us to help others, to be healers. So thank you again, and see you tomorrow.
Repeat the reference just so people can,
That's Luke 6:36 onwards. Luke 6:36 onwards. Okay, so yep. See you tomorrow. Thank you so much to everyone.
Right, and you're sending the handout and the link for tomorrow.
It's in the same link. Thank you for reminding me. It's in the same link. I will upload them again, so people will have access again to the same link that I've sent yesterday with the materials. Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good day.
Bye. You can open your minds. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good morning. Good everything.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Gracias a Dios.
Bendiciones, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Gracias a Dios.
Bye.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sister.
Thank you,
It was very wonderful.
Very much, Sister Paula.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Не видела, że чутко.
Да, продолжится.
Grazie te ama. Vamos a ver, Jacob.